Rain fell in whispering sheets over the town of Harker's Hollow, a quiet place buried deep in the Colorado mountains. On most nights, the streets would be silent by dusk, the pine trees standing like sentinels under the moonlight. But tonight, voices cracked through the air, worried, frantic, and rising. At the edge of the woods, under the trembling halo of a porch light, Dana Cartwright clutched her daughter's rain-drenched sweatshirt. It was all that was left behind. She was right there, Dana whispered to no one, her voice caught somewhere between disbelief and rising hysteria. Just riding her bike. 1 second, then gone. By the time the sheriff arrived, the neighbors had already begun spreading through the trees with flashlights, calling her daughter's name. That made 5 children in 2 weeks. All vanished within a 10-mile radius. No witnesses. No ransom notes. No bodies. What Dana didn't know, what no one knew, was that high above them, something was watching. In orbit, unseen by any human radar, floated a vessel unlike any built on Earth. Its hull shimmered like liquid obsidian, reflecting stars not visible from the ground. Inside, the air buzzed with silent energy. The ship, called Ithrix, was not designed for warfare. It was a tribunal, a judgment chamber sailing the void on a mission of observation. But tonight, judgment was no longer distant. Within a softly glowing chamber, 2 human children sat huddled. Emma Cartwright, 10, and her brother, Noah, 8. They weren't crying anymore. That had stopped after the first hour, when they realized no one was coming to rescue them. The walls glowed with soft patterns, shifting like light on water, but they revealed no exits. Noah was the first to speak. "Do you think this is a spaceship?" Emma didn't answer right away. Her arms were wrapped tightly around him, more for her comfort than his. "Yeah," she finally said, her voice a brittle whisper. "I think it is." Something stirred behind the walls. A soft hum deepened, resonating through the floor. Then a figure entered. It towered over them, 8 feet tall, covered in a sheen of dark scales that shimmered violet under the lights. Its long arms hung nearly to the floor, ending in slender claws that twitched slightly as it moved. Its face was elongated, with eyes like black mirrors and a mouth too wide, filled with fine needle-like teeth. Emma screamed. Noah didn't. He just froze. The creature said nothing at first. It tilted its head, observing them. Then, with a soft pulse of light from a collar at its neck, a voice echoed in the room, not from its mouth, but from everywhere at once. "You are unharmed. You are here for protection." "Protection?" Emma's voice cracked. "You took us." No response came. The creature simply turned and left, the door sealing soundlessly behind it. Elsewhere aboard Ithrix, the Canary sovereign stood in silence before a projection of Earth. Viethal was older than most living Canary, his scales dull by time, but his mind sharp as ever. He had seen a dozen worlds fall, watched as intelligent life consumed itself. Earth, he feared, was next. Beside him, his aide, Elenix, reviewed the data. Another 3 juveniles retrieved from environmental conflict zones. 6 more identified in detention centers marked as experimental youth facilities. Viethal's gaze remained on the planet, and still no central authority capable of protecting its young. None unified, Elenix confirmed. Local efforts vary widely. The species is fragmented. Conflict persists. Viethal's tail twitched once, a gesture of restrained agitation. "Begin tribunal procedures," he ordered. "The time for silent watching is over." Back on Earth, the media was on fire. Missing children, strange atmospheric readings, and rumors of alien involvement lit up every screen. The U.S. government, caught between denial and desperation, scrambled to spin the narrative. A military satellite had detected an anomaly in orbit, too large to ignore, too quiet to understand. General Adler, head of North American Aerospace Command, wasn't convinced it was just a weather balloon. "This thing isn't broadcasting anything, but it's there," he told the president in a tense briefing. "It's parked above our hemisphere. Watching. Waiting. Then we make contact," the president said, "before it does something we can't undo." In orbit, Ithrix listened. Its systems absorbed every transmission, every act of violence, Every courtroom filled with weeping children, every war zone where you've carried rifles. The ship recorded it all. Later that same night, Emma and Noah were led from their room, through winding corridors of translucent walls and thrumming energy. No guards, no restraints, just silence and an overwhelming sense of being small in a place made for something else. They entered a chamber vast and circular, lit from below with pale blue light. Dozens of Canaries stood along the perimeter, each with the same mirror-black eyes, each silent. At the center was a raised dais. Va Thal stood upon it. The sovereign looked down upon the children, not with contempt, but something stranger. Sorrow, perhaps. A deep, ancient kind of grief. You are not prisoners, the voice said. You are evidence. Emma stepped forward, shaking. Of what? The chamber dimmed. Holographic images filled the air. Children in cages, crying under armed watch, others working in fields with swollen hands, still more staring into shattered cameras from crumbled cities. Of your world's failure, Va Thal answered. You were chosen not for what you are, but what your kind refuses to become. Noah stared up at the floating images. Why us? Va Thal's eyes narrowed. Because no one noticed you were gone. The children said nothing. The sovereign turned away. Begin the tribunal. As the chamber filled with low, resonant tones, language woven from sound and light, Emma and Noah were escorted back to their room. But something had shifted. This wasn't just about them anymore. They were the spark in something much, much bigger. And back on Earth, as the clouds above Harker's Hollow broke and moonlight returned to the pines, no one knew what verdict was coming. Only that someone was watching, and that this time, humanity might not be the ones holding the gavel. A soft chime resonated through the air, and the chamber's floor shifted beneath Emma and Noah's feet. They stood on a glowing platform that lifted gently, drifting through a corridor of floating light. Their captors, or guardians, remained at a distance, never touching, never threatening. The silence was worse than shouting. Neither child spoke as the platform carried them into the vast hall they'd glimpsed before. Now it was full. Dozens of towering figures stood in a wide crescent, their eyes fixed forward, their long necks motionless. The Canari were still as statues, yet the atmosphere thrummed with tension. At the chamber's center rose a podium of spiraling crystal, and upon it stood Va Thal. Emma squeezed Noah's hand as they reached the center. A low tone pulsed once through the hall. It wasn't loud, but it reverberated in their bones. Va Thal stepped forward. His movements were deliberate, almost regal. A shimmer pulsed from his throat collar, and a voice emerged, not mechanical, not human, but translated with eerie clarity. Proceedings commence, he said. The Tribunal of Preservation now hears the case against the species Homo sapiens, regarding systemic harm to its juvenile population. Emma's brow furrowed. Wait, what? Noah looked up at her, eyes wide. You're putting all of us on trial, she said, almost shouting. Because of bad people? Va Thal turned his gaze to her, and though his expression didn't change, something in the air shifted, like a glacier leaning toward her. Not because of bad people, the voice said, but because your world permits their actions. What is tolerated becomes accepted. What is accepted becomes systemic. The platform beneath them expanded, forming a disk with a transparent edge. Around them, projections flickered to life. Scenes from Earth, real places, real people. A child chained in a dingy cell. Another hunched over factory machinery with blistered fingers. Footage of juvenile prisons where children screamed behind metal bars. The images changed too quickly process, each one more damning than the last. Emma felt like her chest might cave in. We didn't do this, she whispered. You represent those who allowed it, Va Thal replied. In your silence we find complicity. Noah tugged at her sleeve. I don't want to be here anymore. Neither did she. Far below them, Earth's leaders were scrambling. The UN Security Council had convened an emergency session, and every major power had dispatched encrypted messages toward the anomaly. Most received no answer, but one did. A narrow-beam response targeted a high-security uplink in Geneva. The message was simple. Send one voice. Send truth. And so, Hours later, aboard a rapidly retrofitted experimental shuttle, Ambassador Julian Marlowe was launched toward the Canary vessel with a single objective: negotiate Earth's defense. Marlowe wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a politician in the traditional sense. He was a conflict resolution expert, a man who had ended civil wars without a shot fired. He was known for his calm, his clarity, and above all, his honesty. Still, nothing prepared him for the Canary. The moment he stepped into the tribunal chamber, escorted by silent sentinels, he saw the children. Emma ran to him, and Marlowe knelt instinctively. "Are you all right?" he whispered. Emma nodded, but her eyes were wet. "They're going to judge everyone." He stood slowly, turning to face the sovereign. V.A. Thal watched him with unsettling stillness. "I am Julian Marlowe," he said, voice steady. "I speak on behalf of Earth. Do you deny the charges?" V.A. Thal asked. Marlowe hesitated. Every instinct told him to negotiate, to frame, to soften, but the images hovering in the air around him made that impossible. Instead, he nodded once. "No," he said, "I don't deny them." A murmur rippled through the Canary, not in sound but in energy, the faint flicker of scales, a shift in posture, a low resonance like thunder far away. "I will not insult you with denial or deflection," Marlowe continued. "There is truth in what you've seen. Children suffer on our world, some by malice, some by neglect, some because we have built systems that consume innocence and reward power. I won't defend that." Emma stared at him, stunned. Even Viethal seemed momentarily caught off guard. "But," Marlowe added, "I ask you to consider something else. We are not a singular mind. We are billions. And within those billions are millions who fight for the very children your court now seeks to protect. Teachers, doctors, social workers, parents, activists, people who risk their lives to make sure a single child sleeps safe at night." He paused. The chamber was so silent it felt like even the stars were listening. "We are broken," he said, "but not unfixable. If your mission is truly preservation, then I ask, why judge the patient when you could help us heal?" Viethal tilted his head, a slow, deliberate motion. His voice, when it came, was quiet but piercing. "Would you offer the same mercy," he asked, "to a world that let your children vanish without notice?" Marlowe's throat tightened. Behind him, Emma's hand found his. "No," he said, "but I'd want someone to remind me why they mattered." A second figure stepped forward from the Canary ranks. She was leaner than the others, her scales laced with silver. A diplomat or scholar, perhaps. She spoke in tones more melodic than Viethal's, but no less intense. "We are not executioners, but our purpose is protection. If your species cannot safeguard its young, it becomes a threat to all." "Then let's prove we can," Marlowe said. "Give us terms. Give us time. Not all of it, just enough." The chamber was still again. Somewhere unseen, machines hummed, recording, analyzing, comparing his words to centuries of data. And then Viethal lifted one arm. The holograms faded. The platform dimmed. Even the ambient resonance dropped to a near silence. "You will have one rotation of your world's sun," the sovereign declared. "One cycle to prepare a defense not of weapons, but of will. Prove that your species protects its future." Marlowe nodded, the weight of Earth's hope pressing against his spine. "We'll try." "No," Viethal said, voice like stone cracking. "You either succeed or fail. There is no try." As the platform lowered and the children walked with Marlowe back to the docking bay, Emma looked up at him. "Do you think we can do it?" He looked down at her. This child pulled from the trees into something larger than any war he'd ever brokered. "I think," he said softly, "you just did." The lights dimmed behind them, the tribunal chamber returning to its eerie silence. But far away, on a blue planet full of noise and struggle, something had shifted. Judgment was no longer a threat on the horizon. It was already here. The sun rose over Earth like a ticking clock. Each golden ray sweeping across its surface marked one moment closer to a deadline that could determine the fate of humanity. In cities, deserts, and forests, life stirred as it always had. People waking, moving, surviving. unaware that their entire species had been summoned to prove its worth in the eyes of something older and far more advanced. Julia and Marlowe stood in the central command room of a temporary coalition center hastily built within the Geneva Peace Summit Dome. The world had never seen this kind of unity. Flags that had once stood in silent rivalry now flanked one another like partners in survival. But there was no comfort in symbolism. Time was short, and the burden of proof had never been so literal. He reviewed the Canari's conditions again, projected as luminous glyphs on the glass wall. Demonstrate systemic correction. Prove safeguarding of minors. Document verifiable change. 1 rotation. No extensions. Marlowe exhaled sharply. "This isn't diplomacy," he muttered. "It's trud." A soft voice replied behind him. "Then we better start healing." It was Dr. Lila Narayan, a child psychologist and grassroots activist whose influence had reached the ears of world leaders only in the past month. Now she stood shoulder to shoulder with generals and ministers. They had formed a Council of Defense, not a military front, but an emergency initiative tasked with showing, not telling, that Earth could and would protect its young. "We have 21 hours left," she said, her voice tight, and more stories coming in every minute. From every corner of the planet, data streamed in, documented changes, new laws passed in record time, emergency shutdowns of illegal labor sites, and the sudden purging of corrupt institutions. Surveillance drones now hovered over previously ignored orphanages, and countless children had been relocated from abusive households in coordinated sweeps. Still, for every success story, there were failures. In one feed, soldiers guided trembling children out of a makeshift prison in a war-torn region. In another, a rescue effort failed to reach a trafficking den before its inhabitants vanished. The Canari were watching all, silently absorbing every decision. Emma sat on a cushioned bench nearby. Feet curled beneath her. Noah leaned against her shoulder, asleep for now. She was no longer just a witness. In press conferences and diplomatic exchanges, she had become a symbol, a child spared, a reason to fight harder. "I don't get it," she said softly to no one in particular. "Why do they care so much? Why us?" Marlowe turned. The Canari lost their young ones. All of them. A virus, synthetic, they think. Someone else's war spilled onto their world. They vowed it would never happen again. Not to anyone. Emma blinked, absorbing the weight of it. That's why they protect children, even if they're not theirs. They believe children are the universe's memory. If they disappear, so does everything. As the final hours ticked away, Earth was transformed into something resembling a conscience on fire. Protesters joined police forces to rescue children from slums. Corporations dismantled supply chains tied to exploitation. Entire television networks halted broadcasts to air live footage of child reunifications and community healing. But beneath the spectacle, doubt festered. V.A. Thal and his tribunal had not spoken since issuing the deadline. Their ship remained above Earth, unmoving, its presence like a sword suspended by thought. And though the Canari made no threats, their silence was its own kind of pressure, one that gnawed at every second spent trying to undo generations of apathy. In the final hours, the council gathered once more. The data was displayed for all to see. Graphs of intervention rates, child mortality trends, rescue logs. A massive map pulsed with light, where good had been done. But it still looked too much like a patchwork. Not a world transformed, just temporarily awakened. "We need something more," Lila said, frustration sharp in her tone. "A gesture isn't enough. They asked for proof of protection. What's our proof?" Marlowe paced, hands behind his back. "What if we stop thinking like humans?" he murmured. "What if we show them what they showed us?" Lila tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Let them see through our children's eyes." Within the hour, the council activated a global feed, not curated by newsrooms, not filtered by politics, but hosted by children. Thousands of handheld transmitters were distributed in shelters, classrooms, homes. Children of every language and nation spoke directly into the cameras, describing their hopes, fears, what had changed in their towns, and what still hadn't. Emma and Noah sat before one such transmitter in the Geneva hub. Their feed went live. "My name is Emma," she said quietly. I was taken from Earth because grown-ups didn't protect me. But since I got back, I saw them try. Noah nodded. I saw soldiers help kids. And people arguing on TV about how to fix stuff, not just win. Emma looked into the camera. I don't know if it's enough, but I think it's real. Across Earth, a wave of messages flowed. Children sharing stories of healing and hope. Some spoke of pain. Others simply showed their faces, unhidden, unafraid. In orbit, aboard the Canary vessel, Viethal and the Tribunal watched. For hours, they said nothing. Then, in the final minute before the deadline passed, the Sovereign appeared once more in the skies. His image projected above oceans and continents like a constellation awakened. The cycle ends, he declared. Judgment is rendered. Every heart seemed to pause. In your past, we saw negligence. In your present, desperation. But in your children, we see something else. Defiance and despair. The beginning of change. The sky shimmered. The ship began to ascend. You are not absolved, Viethal said, but you are spared. Relief crashed through Earth like a flood. Emma burst into tears. Marlowe sat down, too tired to cheer. Around them, the council exhaled, some collapsing into chairs, others hugging silently. Above, the alien vessel dimmed as it passed beyond the exosphere, leaving only the stars. But something new hung in the air, not just a sense of survival, but of obligation. The children had saved Earth. Now Earth had to earn it. The sky was ordinary again. Blue, clouds scattered, unremarkable. There were no alien ships drifting like celestial judges overhead. No broadcasts echoing across continents. The stars had grown quiet, and humanity had been left with nothing but the silence and the weight of what had just passed. Emma stood in the courtyard of a temporary recovery center overlooking Lake Geneva. The wind smelled like pine and coldstone. She watched birds wheel overhead, each one oblivious to how close the world had come to being condemned by something beyond itself. Nearby, Noah balanced on the edge of a low wall, arms stretched for balance. He was laughing, really laughing, for the first time since they had returned from a Canary vessel. And yet there was something underneath the sound, something Emma could feel even if she couldn't name it. A tension that didn't leave with the aliens. A pressure that now belonged to them. Julian Marlowe approached, his jacket loose, eyes tired but alert. He paused next to Emma, watching Noah quietly. You'd think it was all a dream, he said, if not for the scars. Emma didn't look up. Do you think they're watching? I bet on it. Then we shouldn't stop, she said. Right. No, he agreed. We really shouldn't. In the weeks following Tribunal's verdict, governments had scrambled to convert short-term gestures into long-term action. Emergency laws were signed into permanent frameworks. Budgets were reallocated. Surveillance against abuse was no longer experimental, but mandatory. Schools received emergency funding. Institutions that had survived on silence for decades were dragged into light. But the hardest work came not from policy, but from people. Communities that once turned inward began forming networks, sharing strategies, offering help across borders. Adults found themselves reevaluating old norms. News anchors admitted past complicity. Cultural icons publicly apologized. It was not perfect, nothing close, but it was real. And yet, beneath this rising tide of reform, an unease lingered. A question no one could answer. What happens the next time the stars look down? The Council of Defense had dissolved its formal title, but its members continued to meet in smaller circles. Some pushed for greater interplanetary preparedness. Others focused on ethics reform. Marlowe advocated for something harder to quantify, cultural resilience. We can't rely on fear, he said in one meeting. What we build must survive without an alien presence looming overhead. If we only do the right thing because we're afraid someone's watching, we're not saving ourselves. We're stalling our own fall. Dr. Lila Narayan nodded. So we need to rewire our humanity, or remind it of itself. Elsewhere, Emma found herself in front of microphones more often than she ever wanted. Schools invited her to speak. Talk shows asked for interviews. Politicians requested appearances. She said no to most of them. The attention made her skin feel wrong, like she was being turned into something shiny and hollow. Only once did she agree to speak publicly, on the anniversary of their return. She stood on the same platform in Geneva where world leaders had first watched the Canary ship descend. Her voice projected into a space no longer filled with fear, but with a cautious kind of hope. "I used to think grown-ups didn't care," she said simply. "And maybe a lot of them didn't. But now they do, or they're trying to. And that's enough to start something." She looked straight into the camera. "But don't forget what it took to get here." Her words became part of school curricula in dozens of countries. They were carved into plaques, etched into virtual archives. But Emma went home afterward and cried for hours, not because she was sad, but because she knew it still wasn't over. For Noah, life settled more easily. He returned to his hometown with foster parents who had fought through 10 layers of bureaucracy to get to him. He slept soundly for the first time in years. Still, he kept a small glass pendant around his neck, a gift from the Canary translator during their release. It contained nothing more than a fleck of alien crystal. But to him, it was proof that someone else had cared when no one on Earth did. In time, others began to speak out. Children who had been rescued during the Great Sweeps came forward with stories. Some told of new families. Others described trauma still healing. Their voices, once hidden, became guiding stars for the reconstruction of everything. But the Canary had not returned. No messages, no new ships, just a single line, broadcast anonymously across a secure network of satellites, and quietly confirmed by a classified UN task force. Memory is not punishment. It is purpose. The Council interpreted it as permission, not praise, not warning, just acknowledgement. A signal that the test was ongoing, indefinitely. And so humanity continued. Years passed. Marlowe retired from diplomatic work, but founded a network of ethical councils for emerging governments. He declined awards, declined interviews. He once said the only thing worth holding was accountability, and that couldn't be displayed on a shelf. Dr. Narayan's mental health initiative for rescued children became the global standard. Her work reshaped everything from school systems to legal definitions of harm. She often credited Emma and Noah in her speeches, but never without a trace of sorrow. She knew what the world had put on their shoulders. Emma became a writer, not a celebrity, not an activist in the public eye, but her stories, fictional and raw, traveled farther than speeches ever could. In them, she created whole worlds where children led civilizations, where adults asked permission to rule, where pain was not erased but seen and healed. She rarely mentioned Canary anymore, only in the margins, and always with wonder. Noah grew into someone kind and startlingly curious. He studied languages, hoping one day to decipher more of the Canary code. But deep down, he knew the message had already been clear. Protect what matters, or someone else will decide how. Late one autumn, years later, Emma stood on a hill above a city rebuilt with care, watching as dusk swallowed the sky. She thought of the chamber where stars had judged her people. She thought of how her voice, once small and trembling, had echoed through something larger than Earth. She didn't know if they'd ever return. She only knew that if they did, they would find a world still trying, still learning, and perhaps, finally, worthy of its children.